Here and so is the BBI report. Tonight, the right honorable questions about the return of the Prime Minister's office. Also, jobs for the boys of a brave new world. The ABC of the BBI. The memo seeks a moratorium on COVID-19 to pave way for the BBI clash. The rise and fall of all electoral commissions is Yvonne's take. Kashuri is back from Kisii with a jig and a punchline. Kaikai tracks the kicking and screaming at the Judicial Service Commission. Just who has a case to answer? And the angle is swinging between the squeaking of wheelbarrows, the chiming of reggae, and the clanging of school bells. We'll also have a guest gangster tonight, the Joint Secretary of the Building Bridges Initiative, Paul Mwangi. He'll be joining us here in a minute. Yulan Zale is helping us with the sign interpretation.
Our country is staring at a constitutional moment. The question at hand, and one requiring a constitutional consensus, is therefore, how do we as a people, as a nation, resolve the winner-take-all situation within a context of competitive politics as required by democratic practice?
All right, that's President Uhuru Kenyatta speaking about this moment that finally arrived here. The country already discussing the report of the Steering Committee on the implementation of the Building Bridges to a United Kenya Task Force. And tonight we have the Joint Secretary of that Task Force, Paul Mwangi. I think we just start with this question. How does this document, in a sentence, move us from point A to point B?
It enables us to sort out problems that we have been unable to sort out because of the political contestation that has been there. That we have a moment where people are, for this time, able to talk to each other. And it's a moment in which we can get some things done.
All right, the first question that I've seen people raise is that it essentially makes government, in its broad sense, very big. And the question that a lot of people are asking is, for example, about Parliament. I mean, there is an attempt, for example, to address the gender issue, but the net effect of that is that the Senate is almost doubling, if not more, and we have the National Assembly also getting bigger at a time when people have been talking about the wage bill and the size of government, our debt crisis in the country. How can you face Kenyans tonight and say, this is why we did what we did? This is why we are slapping you with another bill from Parliament?
First, as a committee, we didn't come up with the gender parity rule. It exists. It has been impossible to enforce, to implement. What we were dealing with is we tried to look at the different formations that we could possibly come up with that can prevent extra costs. We were invited to look at the South African method of doing it, where you abolish constituencies and political parties simply come up with a list that has the gender parity. The problem is that the political culture that we have in Kenya and the kind of democratic practice we have we will not surrender 6 decades of that practice to adopt what South Africa did. So eventually we have to settle for the fact that we are going to have to do this through representation. We have tried very much to limit the number of members that are needed for this. The reason why we took the 47 women to the Senate is that we are trying to convince women to trade in numbers for legislative power. Because if you listen to the women representatives, they will tell you that that 30% doesn't make any difference. And when men want to pass anything, they simply ignore them. So we are asking them to accept actual legislative power, because you now have a Senate where gender determines whether something passes or not. And that when you go to the National Assembly, you take a bit less in that. Don't look at the numbers in the National Assembly and instead exercise the legislative powers you have at the Senate.
I look at it this way, Paul. When you have 47 elected senators male, 47 elected senators female, first of all, essentially you're saying 2 senators per county. And we know voting in the Senate is by delegation. So what if there's a contrary opinion between the male senator and the female senator, let's say from Kiambu or Kisumu or Malindi, or Kilifi, how does that play out? Are you not creating a conflict, as it were, in the Senate?
No, the conflict, because the two senators represent the interests of their county. And we anticipate that they would all agree, or possibly, if they listen to the people from their constituencies, they would agree on what is best for their county. But the issue would be that a lot of every decision that is made is going to have a gender element. Mm-hmm. And that gender element will be so powerful in the sense that if you deny it and the women decide to stand together, you cannot pass anything without having to listen to the women legislative power.
Looking at the structure of the executive in the BBI report, now we are having the return of the Prime Minister's office and the two deputy Prime Ministers and the cabinet in the House and leader of official opposition also in the House. And you said this report is supposed to be suluhisho for a lot of the issues we are having. But when I look at some of these proposals in terms of structure of the executive, we are going back to what we are used to. We've had this before. Does this mean that we cannot deal with change, that we have to go back to what we were used to for us to have a solution in terms of now all the issues that seem to bedevil us?
It appears that the experiment we did with the American style of government was a bad experiment, and that what we had been doing before we adopted this constitution actually worked for us. We have had a government that is so alienated from the common person that people don't feel cabinet ministers anymore. They do not feel as if they are part and parcel of any government that comes up. So there is need to make sure that the people who are in that government are people who represent, who are coming from the grassroots, and therefore represent what the people feel and they would want to see in their government. That is what we have tried to bring back.
All right. Still on the question of the executive and perhaps the institution of the presidency, many would say that the clamor for multipartism, from 1992, was to reduce the powers in the institution of the presidency, and that now we seem to be seeing a return of a more powerful president from what we have in the 2010 Constitution, the president being able to appoint the prime minister, deputies, including another arm of government, that's the judiciary, the power to appoint the judiciary ombudsman. What would you say to those who say we seem to be returning to something that we fought so hard against?
Imperial presidency.
Imperial presidency.
First, it's not true that there's an imperial president. The president at the moment has the power to fire anybody who sits in the cabinet. And that has not changed. So long as the prime minister sits in the cabinet and the deputy prime minister sits in the cabinet, the president must have power over them. Otherwise, he will never be able to run the government. When it came to the judiciary ombudsman, in fact, the initial proposals that we had played with was to have the judicial ombudsman appointed by the Chief Justice, as happens now. But then it could not see how the judiciary could appoint the same person who is supposed to be a prefect over their misdoings. So you have to get somebody to do that appointment from outside. Currently, the president already appoints 2 people to the commission directly. And this person is going through a vetting in Parliament and gets independent upon appointment. So we cannot say that simply because it is the president appointing him that he will be rogue or he will answer to the president. He is an independent commissioner. And in any event, once he gets there, he has his independence, he has his powers, and he doesn't make any decisions by himself. All he does is that he investigates complaints and he hands them over to the commission, which makes the decision. So he doesn't make any decisions himself over judges.
But on the appointment of the Prime Minister, he can actually override everything that Parliament says. I mean, it gets to, I think, the third time, when the second time actually, when there's no consensus, the president can appoint whoever he wants without further reference to Parliament.
Because we were trying to avoid a stalemate, where in the first move, it is the leader of the party who automatically takes the position. If Parliament rejects that, then you ask that same party to bring somebody else. Again, that fails. If you don't form a government now, then you could have been a stalemate. So you now leave it to the president to say, if those two have failed, who do you think can occupy this position? But remember that the decision finally still is a decision of the House. It's only that you must now remove this stalemate of how you get to choose the person who can occupy the position.
Paul, one more. Look at the Prime Minister. this person would be appointed by the president. And essentially from what I read is that the leader of a party or coalition of parties with a majority in the House becomes the prime minister. In 2007, we had a scenario where the person who was elected president did not have a majority in parliament. So does it mean that you can have the president from one party and a prime minister who is the leader of a party or a coalition of parties that has a majority in the National Assembly becoming the prime minister? Isn't it another point of conflict likely?
Look at first what that message would mean, because if the people have appointed one party as a majority but has denied that party the presidency, what they could be saying is that the person who they brought in the presidential election, the people have no faith in that person as the person who can keep them together and who can lead them, but that they possibly prefer the policies of that party to that of the person who they have elected. So the people would have spoken and said, we like government policies to follow this political party, but we want the person to be president to be from another political party. So it is up to the two of them to have to learn how to work together. And it does happen in the French constitutional model where I think 2-3 times they have ended up in a scenario in which they call cohabitation. And the two of them must now learn how to take the message that they have gotten from the people and learn how they are going to run government together.
Paul, I want to take you to something that has been treated like the tree in the middle of the Garden of Eden. Nobody discusses it, nobody talks about it. You were in the Supreme Court in 2017, and the Supreme Court nullified the presidential election based on clearly demonstrable issues. People could not account for numbers, where they're coming from. I'm talking about election rigging. The same could be said of the 2007 election. The numbers were not believable. The numbers by which the winner was declared were not being believed. But looking at the BBI report, looking at the functions, nobody is talking about the question of credibility of elections. How does this document help Kenyans to ensure that the votes that are cast are the votes that are counted and the votes that are announced to determine the winner? Because it doesn't matter that it will be 2, president and deputy, and now this is 5. If we are doing the elections the same way, it's a problem, don't you think so?
First, if you look at all the way from 2007, it's been the same story. Every commission that comes never does well enough. And one of the things we had to look at is that people are very suspicious of whoever gets into position as electoral commissioners. But we did sit with the current commissioners, and we listened to many people. There were questions of capture. People believing that decisions are being made behind curtains. So we wanted all parties to have a seat where the decisions are being made. And if there are questions to be raised, you must start raising that question first with the person you brought. So
surely, Paul, it's beyond that. Last election, an election official died. Chris Msando died.
And for that reason, it casts suspicion as to what has happened, which is very different than what happened in 2013, where people are complaining that decisions have been made and you don't know what happened and how those decisions were arrived at. So if political parties have at least a seat at the decision-making table where elections are concerned, then we anticipate that possibly they will be able to ensure that those decisions are decisions that are acceptable to the political parties that they represent.
But what else is being done to fix the issues, within our electoral management bodies and how we manage elections? Because it's one thing to change the electoral body all over again. If we succeed in doing that, this would be the 7th. That would mean we have had a new electoral management body for every single multi-party election we have had since '92. This would be the 7th. So what beyond just saying that we want to, it says the task force recommends starting, going to the next election on a clean slate. But, what does that mean besides just addressing the underlying issues, which everybody says is a free, fair, credible process whose results would be accepted by all, winners and losers?
The problem we believed was not necessarily the law. if you look at the regime that was there and had been put up to manage the last election, it was one of the most comprehensive, all the way from the technology to all the laws that have been passed. So we must start addressing the management itself and the people, and say you can have the best laws, but if you can't put credible people on the table, or if you cannot ensure that they can reach credible decisions, then you will never have a proper election, regardless of how much law.
But Paul, those people will be sent home, they have security of tenure, they will earn their money, but no one is really held accountable for what happened.
Yes, but I don't think that in itself is what is going to stop it. The problem is, for instance, in the last election, one of the complaints that came was that the power to appoint whoever is the chair and the commissioners, political parties are not involved. And that the president who can be participating in an election can determine who gets to be commissioner and then participate in that election. So that is what you must change. How do you constitute that body so that you enhance both the fact that it works in a better, in a more credible way, and also that people have more faith in the kind of decisions that it reaches.
There's something that, I mean, I've also had as part of the criticism going into this whole idea of expanding the executive, where you have now the 5 new, sort of the 5 positions up there, and that somehow this is supposed to make people feel included in government and that sort of thing. But if you think about the ethnic nature of our politics, in a sense, you will probably just be placating 5 communities.
Big 5.
The big 5, as it were, like in a national park. But what happens to the rest of the animals in the park?
But what we have now, at the moment, we have the big one. So it is possible for government to literally be dominated by one ethnic community or by 2 ethnic communities. So you have to try to give it a broad base as much as is possible. And I think this is the best that you can do. Taking it beyond, at least within the formations that are acceptable in systems of government around the world, this is the best that we could find.
Is it an admission that when the big 5 are at peace, then Kenya is at peace?
Not necessarily, but we can't ignore the fact that we are ethnic. We can't ignore that we have ethnic communities, and that often those ethnic communities have communal political interests that we can't wish away. And it is possibly time to start talking to it.
Paul, let me ask you, Paul, about your level of confidence about the future of this country under BBI's sort of regime, because we've had a very good constitution, and defenders of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 will tell you most of the stuff that you put into the BBI report is actually contained in the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Article 43 speaks about poverty. We just needed to actually implement that. What is your level of confidence, considering that the frustration around Constitution of Kenya 2010 has been about lack of political will to implement it?
I think the cliche that what we need to do is implement a constitution and not to change it is not correct. And nobody, for instance, one of the problems that we have is we go to an election, we have a person who becomes second with millions of followers or voters, and then ends up in the cold. To resolve that problem, we can't talk of implementation. What is there in the constitution that caters for that problem? That you can say, don't amend the constitution, implement. So those who say that we need to implement the constitution need to start showing us what are those sections that are not implemented, and show us how the implementations of those sections is going to cure the problem that we are trying to resolve. And I don't think they can do that. So what we have is we have this saying that, as I said, became a cliche, and it's now used when you want to oppose BBI without any good reason.
But I guess some would say when it comes to implementation would be, you know, systems like devolution, which is inclusivity is more about, you know, development and resources getting to the people to enable them to make decisions for themselves as to, you know, what direction they want to lead themselves in as far as development, and that perhaps that is where the crux of the matter is, as opposed to putting the big 5, you know, at a top level and having that top heavy. Is the problem of inclusivity in this country just about me seeing my tribesman or tribeswoman at the top, but rather having equitable distribution of resources? Because some would say that you're trying to solve it superficially.
It is everything, and the expanding the base for the executive is not the only solution. One of the other solutions we came up with is, for instance, the word fund, which requires at least 5% of the money that's sent to counties distributed among all wards. When we went down, we met wards that were saying they have never seen any development because the governor doesn't feel in a sense of obligation towards them because they possibly voted against him. So when we talk now of making sure that resources go to the people, that was one of the ways we were thinking about, of ensuring that every governor, regardless of whether he likes that ward or not, is going to have to dedicate money for development in that ward. So I would say the expansion of the executive is just one of the solutions. It's not a silver bullet.
There's just one issue. Sorry. I look at it this way, Paul. There's some counties in this country that have already developed that ward development fund. I've heard the governor of Meru talk about it, the governor of Uasin Gishu talk about it. Was it really a goodwill question and the desire to implement it and to, make sure that there is equitable development across the wards in the counties, just like there is a need to have equitable development across the country without necessarily imputing that if you have your man at the top or your woman at the top, then you're assured of development and that feeling of inclusion. Is it more about development, equitable distribution of resources and opportunities, or rather that positioning that with so-and-so at the top, we feel included?
If it were possible to ensure that, for instance, that every governor who comes in is able to do that equitable development, as you have said, then you don't need a constitutional amendment. The problem is you can't trust that. The current governor might be doing it. What happens when the next one comes, who might not be an equally good fella? Then you're going to end up with words that are going to suffer for possibly the next 10 years. So if you're going to protect those words, you need to lock it somewhere. And the only place you can lock it is in the Constitution, because it won't even work if you try to put it in the statute.
A question for you, Mr. Mwangi. What is contained in this report is views from the people. So I'd like a bit of details about exactly how many people gave their views in this report, in terms of the regions you traveled to and the people you spoke to, because there are those who say, is this really what the people of Kenya want? Is this what they told you when you went for all those sittings to whatever parts of this country you went to? Hii ni maoni ya Wakenya that isn't contained in here.
First, this process began in 2018. So we've been doing this for some time, and in the first phase, we traveled to every county, and we had representatives from every constituency, and we tried as much as possible to cover all the areas. And we believe we are the only task force that actually physically has ever visited 47 counties. When we came to the second phase, we had a two-pronged approach, because we had regional meetings that were done both by political parties and by governors in all their respective areas, and they had public participation in all the areas that they were. They all reached resolutions that they brought to us. But before they even reached those resolutions, we had delegates conferences where we sent experts who took them through the first report that we had done. Then what they gave us now became the feedback of what they thought of the first report and what they thought about implementation. We had other consultative meetings here in Nairobi, where we also listened to the various groups which are indicated also in the report. So I think we did our best to ensure that we can capture every opinion that is possible.
And going forward, what's the plan? Because even the president says, watu wajisome, waelewe, wafahamu before they make a decision. So what's the plan going forward to ensure that watu ndio they get a chance to actually understand what is contained in the whole report, and not just what is of political importance, if you can use that word.
And also turning into reality.
I think one, because of things that will become law, for instance, the constitutional amendments, those will require that they are addressed very, very specifically as legal amendments. So we'll have to look at the report in different ways. So what we have proposed as constitutional amendments, we need to listen to what people think about that, whether it can work. We'll have to tinker with some of them where people think that they should be amended or possibly made to work better. We are now going to start listening to politicians who at the end of the day are also going to end up with this document. It's going to end up in Parliament, Senate and National Assembly, and it's going to end up in the referendum, where the politicians again are possibly the greatest say. So we are also going to be listening to what they have to say about that. And then finally you end up with a document that largely has some consensus, and you start the promulgation process.
Paul, just a quick one. I want to hear your rationale, the rationale of the committee in proposing to amend Article 171 of the Constitution by including a judiciary ombudsman as a member of the JSC. What is that about?
That is what we have at the Judicial Service Commission currently. Is the problem we have is people don't know what's going on. You don't know how many complaints there are. You don't know when they will be prosecuted. By the time they did the last sitting, there were complaints that they had not even sat for 3 months. I mean, they think 3 years. The disciplinary process was simply stuck. So if you have a complaint, for instance, against the magistrate in Lamu or in Malindi, until you come to Nairobi and present your petition to the Judicial Service Commission and possibly wait another 3 years for them to attend to it, it will never get done. So you need a system that reaches out to people. And once you take your complaint to the ombudsman, you're able to follow up with the person, and he's able to sit at the commission on your behalf and presenting your complaint.
But he's an appointee of the president, so would critics be wrong to call him a prefect of the executive in the judiciary?
What we have seen is that in very many places, even when the president is told to appoint people, there are always recruitment processes. And that is required in very many positions, even where the president is told that he's the one to appoint. And we anticipate that there will have to be some system of recruitment that will identify who is the best person to occupy that position, and then you have the president appointing that person. So it is not a personal matter for the presidency, and it is not a matter which he has discretion, which he can exercise any way he wants.
But Paul, sorry, just a small follow-up to what Linus is asking. We've seen previously a situation where the executive has had a problem or problems with certain judges. They made certain decisions and they were accused of, being this or being that. Isn't this also an opportunity, using the judiciary ombudsman, to have petitions and complaints against certain judges who probably would be asked maybe to step aside to be investigated, and maybe if found not to be guilty, they are returned, by way of doing it, raising questions on their integrity?
No, the first step would be that everything goes to the ombudsman, who himself investigates and finds out whether there is anything to take to the Judicial Service Commission. So if the complaint is frivolous, it doesn't move beyond there. But the other thing that we did is we also expanded the options that are available to the Judicial Service Commission when dealing with judges. Previously, all you can do to a judge is remove, and that has brought problems in the past. So we want to see places where you can either reprimand a judge or you can suspend a judge. So the question of that you hit judges by removing them is removed, and there are different ways in which you possibly can deal with the judge without removal.
All right. I have just one from lawyer Olelai Buta. I'd like your response to what he put out on Twitter. He says, when you substantially alter the executive, parliament and the judiciary, this is simply replacing the current constitution. We can't term these as simple amendments. He then goes on to say that crafting a referendum question is never an easy task, and we have a constitutional amendment bill with 58 amendments. What if I agree with 40 and disagree with the other 18? Do I vote yes or no? I guess for me, it's just, the way forward in terms of how you craft a referendum question, when you have 58 amendments, and whether you agree with his assessment that this is in fact, replacing the constitution entirely as opposed to just amending it.
First, I think he's mixed up when he talks about the referendum question in this respect, because the issue of a referendum question only comes when you're having a referendum under the Elections Act, when you want to find out what the public thinks of something. So in Britain, they had to have a referendum to find out whether the government should go ahead with Brexit. Then you have a question. But in where we are, we have a referendum as part of a process of amending the Constitution. And it comes in either because some of the things you're proposing are grave, and therefore even after Parliament passes, people are required to approve of it. Or you can have the same process because you have chosen to have an amendment of the Constitution through a popular initiative. So I think on that first he is mistaken. But in all amendments to the law, you do not present single sections, section by section, asking people to approve of. All legal amendments come in the form of bills. And if the whole thing doesn't make sense, the danger of that the proposer faces is that the whole bill will be rejected.
Right.
So even those who draft bills ensure that the whole thing is beneficial to people, because if there's something that can help them, they might end up throwing your entire proposal because of one thing. That happened in 2005 when the first bill was rejected because it had proposals that people did not like.
All right, thank you very much. Paul Mwangi is speaking to us. There is Joint Secretary of the Building Bridges Initiative about this report that has just been released. Obviously, they've been working for the last almost 3 years, and so we obviously cannot go through the reports on one show, but this, we hope, gives you an opportunity to begin to interrogate some of the questions a little bit better. Newsgang is taking a break. We'll be right back with some of the politics that is already starting barely 2 days after the report was released.